Narayanan, Chair for Human Rights and Social Justice. Yesterday we engaged in a discussion about the practice of reading text to identify patterns, similarities and differences in ideas and themes, which is an essential exercise when writing about a specific theme. Today, Professor Sanal Mohan sir will be dwelling deep into the specificities of academic writing, focusing on the methods and ways of knowing within the domain in which we write. And I also hope you will get a clarity about academic writing that requires precision, a clarity and an engagement with the existing literature, which also contributing original insights to the field. Now I invite Professor Sanal Mohan to start today's session.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Rajesh. Colleagues, we move on to the issues that we try to open up in our yesterday's discussion. So I just, for brevity's sake, I just made a couple of PowerPoint slides which in fact will tell you how not to make a PowerPoint. This is not a fancy thing, it's very basic. So the idea is to look at how we can do this, because I thought that this is by and large a group of people doing kind of work in history and ethnography or already social science in that sense. But I think many of the issues that we try to open up also good for social sciences across the discipline. So I think look at this in that way. Now, those of you who are in history would know that there are many ways in which one can really talk about history. So before I go into that, can you go to the first announcement? Yeah, here. Look at what we originally intended to do. That's also important. We were supposed to straight away begin with writing, but we had a discussion on last. Rajesh made a resume of yesterday's main themes. We talked about how we are going to start with reading, different kinds of readings and so on. So that is the final part of it is to look at how we can talk about subaltern lives. It means the lives of men and women, children, young adults, etc., who lived at some point of time whose histories have not been heard about. So I may read out from some of the things which I wrote. You can also bring me materials from your own research. That is that we can do after a while, after discussing this. I just wanted to signpost this, how one can really write the histories of people who lived or who must have lived. So there are some very basic texts which you may want to subsequently do. I will come to that. Okay, now just that. Okay, thank you. So I just put it like this, writing social sciences, and you may want to bring in your own kind of experiences as researchers and bring in insights from your practices. So I just broadly look at history and ethnography. Because in other disciplines, these methods and practices, although they are related to one another, but they might be different, slightly different. So let's begin with historians. Now you can see where you find these intersections when you talk about. There are different varieties of history. You look at the economic history, social history, political history, intellectual history, and a variety of history that you can identify, literary histories. Some of them I have not included here. Just, I thought I would signpost some varieties when you want to do history. Okay, this is very familiar to you. The economic history would look at larger structures of the economy, how economy has been changing, or labor practices have been evolving. So this morning I had a discussion with Mr. Subhash, and we discussed how different kinds of communities engaging in different kinds of labor, which means creating value. They have been engaged in creating value, but they were constrained by society in which they were living. The social power, domination, etc., control. That also determined in the way, the ways in which mobility would occur. Mobility doesn't mean that social mobility, but it begins with physical, geographical mobility, etc. So economic history has this wider sweep from larger economic structures, political economy, processes of production, creation of value, etc. So many things can be talked about, including the social classes. And that social classes will take you to the domain of social history. So what does it mean? You are writing about the social processes, how social classes emerge, and what is the social history after all? Social history has been there for a long time, but the kind of social history that you read today would be different. I don't know if the students reading history here are familiar with a person like an Indian historian like Sumi Sarkar. Sumi Sarkar is a person who I don't know, because I don't teach you, I'm not sure. I guess you must have read some stuff by Sumi Sarkar. He is one of those very significant social historians of India. This name just came to my mind, but there are many others, doing social history or who did social history in India. And what is this social history of? It's this social history that I am talking about. Contemporary genre of social history is very different from the kind of social history you might read in the works of early nationalist historians, who wrote on nationalism like Asim Aditya. Now, if you read his histories, he wrote profusely on various aspects of Indian history, to mention the modern. He also wrote about social life, the condition of women, and all that. So there's a very old-fashioned social history which talks about how Indian society progressed or evolved and so on, and what was the condition of women, etc. Very, state-centric narrative by and large. But then you have a narrative of dominant classes and caste coming there. And then social history is nothing but, the description of condition of people, but the social history of the kind that you deal with today is very different from this. Because you are talking more about the questions of social dynamics, the way the society has been transforming, how the questions of domination, for example, is understood, how subordination is understood. How do we think about social change? What does it mean to talk about social change? So today's social history is very dynamic, and consistently changing. Draw your attention to that. Then of course we have political history. There was a time when political history was the dominant sort of history, but that just changed. But then we also have very interesting historians today working on many aspects of political institutions, personalities, empires, etc. So I will not say that political history is no longer important or it's not there. There is a certain kind of effort by historians. In fact, if you look at some of the writings in the past few years, you find a lot of people writing about Mughal kings and so on. A lot of works have been written. Or about various other political formations, about the Vijayanagara Empire. I just draw the attention of history students to that. Then you have intellectual history, writing about the history of ideas kind of stuff. How do you write intellectual trends of a particular period? Particular kind of ideas and their dynamism, the transformation that those ideas brought in. So intellectual history is another domain. For instance, in fact, I don't know if you have listened to Dilip Menon, who gave a talk a few days ago at IUCS Society. He was talking about the kind of work which he was engaged in, writing about Cassidy Barrett's work, or the work which he did on Chakramani Swami. So you have these Malayali figures being talked about in a very different way. And of course we have a lot of works now, including that of Prof. Narayanan. These are examples of intellectual history of the sort that has happened right here in Kerala. Then, then now into the other aspects of it. So I invite you to think about all this, different varieties of history. Then about any research that we are doing, because writing comes out of that. When you talk about writing, basically the idea is that you explore a new area of inquiry. And alongside that, you go for new evidences. If you want to put it differently, through our practice as historians or ethnographers, anthropologists, or whichever is your area of specialization, ultimately you end up creating an archive of your own, right? So which could be coming out of your field work. As an ethnographer or as a social anthropologist, you go to the field, you work in a particular community, or in a professional, amidst a professional group, or whatever area you choose to work with. And at the end of the day, you will end up creating an archive of your own through field work, etc. So this new archive that you create as an individual researcher is very, very important in determining the kind of work which you will do. Because if I don't create my own archive, this is how I look at this. What will happen? We may not be in a position to do new research. I mean, our assumption is that every research has to come up with something new. And that's a big challenge because, as I said yesterday, sometimes we find that when we start a research, we are constrained by the fact that already someone has done this, So we ask this question, why I am doing it? The question is there. Why I am doing this? Because there are certain problems, that we need to really engage with as social science people. So let us, take another couple of examples. In fact, the major institutions supporting social science research. But in India, it's a different story that social science research is supported. But people actually disagree with the kind of statement that I made. The social science research is supported by the government of India or various state governments in many ways, or if sometimes the support will be much less. But if you take ICSSR space, ICSSR has identified a few important things. If you have seen their kind of call for applications, you will see that they have identified a few themes, right? Including this kind of stuff which is rolled out as what's that? The ways in which the government policy has made accessible LPG for the underprivileged sections, and you need to write a PhD on that. If you are happy, you will get some money. It is good to talk about LPG for the poor and marginalized group. But when research institution, something like ICSSR, takes an a priori decision to support only such and such teams, then we lose that variety of social sciences. So whereas we look at, sometimes I read the ways in which social sciences are being supported in other international institutions. So the problems that we discussed yesterday here, one of our colleagues wanted to write about 2018 floods. I forgot her name. Sorry. So climate change, the climatic kind of emergencies and so on. So they appear as a very significant theme. If you check the major universities and research funding organizations across the world, whether it is European Union or Social Science Research Council in New York and so on. So there are many other institutions, or even I think Narayanan Foundation. They all support this kind of research. Not just, in fact, Narayanan will give money for regions and countries where anthropology has not developed much. So there are special grants for that kind of thing. The point I am making is that these institutions, although they have very specifically targeted kind of funding, they don't say that funds will be available only for this particular thing. But if you check, next generation social scientists in Africa, there is a call for funding by Social Science Research Council in New York. But that scholarship is just meant for supporting social science research in Africa, not for Asians or not for the rest of the global stuff. Okay, so my question is, the problem that we are giving you, then, we need to have an open-ended system where any social science field would be researched. But unfortunately, that is not happening in India now. So there are certain themes which the current government at the center feel as important. Whatever that institution feels as important is the support. So therefore, that such problems are there. But basically, when we want to do some research, we really think about what is our own kind of preference. And that preference will tell us why I do this. Even if we don't get much funding, some themes that are very close to our hearts will demand absolute commitment to that. So there are reasons why I do this. I will be very quick now. So each one of us can think about the kind of theme that you work, and there are some reasons why you want to do that. Then one can ask, is it a new problem? Sometimes many people must have studied it, and you may want to study some aspect of that, or you may want to do a kind of what I can say. You want to join the debate. It is something which is being debated. Like for instance, the question of Kerala model, right? If you propose something in front of the doctoral committee or whatever it is called, research PhD admission committee, so they can ask you very well why you want to study this, which has already been studied by many people. But then you can say that, well, that's true. Yet I wish to join this particular debate. I want to join this debate and see from my own perspective what I can offer. So I am coming with certain kind of perspective of my own, and I think that perspective can unsettle some of the received notions that is being treated as part of Kerala model of development. Kottayam. So then even if it's not a new problem, you have a new perspective which you want to talk about. That's what. So you are joining a debate, something like that, or you say that you want to make a reassessment of this. I mean, these are the ways in which we propose our, research idea. So all these are ways in which we tell people that how we want to do this. So I identified a few things, and you find it as in many other documents you will see the same thing being repeatedly given. Wherever social science research takes place, and I think these are universal problems. When you want to do that, okay, this is the way you do. Then you talk about. Then let's just look at what are the kind of sources of historical analysis. So we talk about primary sources. So what are these primary sources? Things which are created along. Suppose if you want to talk about something of the 18th century, something that had happened in the 18th century, and if a certain event, or mostly historians talk about structures, events, processes, and so on. The materials that are referred to as sources would mean, for example, the written materials, written sources. A report, for instance, let me tell you, a report on certain labor processes, which was written in 18th century or late 18th century. If I give you an example probably that is familiar to people, you have this 2-volume book, that report of Warden Corner, which is available now in library also here. Yeah, that would be nice. Okay. Thank you. Suppose if you want to read some early 19th century text and see how, for instance, Kottayam is referred to. All the description of Kottayam is familiar to us, right? How Kottayam is described in Warden Corner, or how Changanasheri is described. If you look at the writings of some of those missionaries based in here in Kottayam, they give you absolutely stunning descriptions of Kottayam, very interesting descriptions. And we all have a lot of description of this area in the Dutch records. I think it was a year before we had some scholars like Jos Gomens. He is a very important historian in Netherlands, writing on the colonial history of Asia. They all have been writing about Kerala also. So they brought out a lot of volumes, and they also actually have a good collection of maps of this area, in which rivers, markets, institutions of that time, such as, this is in the late 18th century when you don't have many public institutions, but we do have religious institutions like churches, temples, mosques, and all that. Then markets and agricultural settlements, lands. So if you look at these maps that are available now, the late 18th century maps produced by the Dutch, we get a very interesting kind of descriptions of the places. Suppose if somebody wants to, as Subhash has been telling me, he wants to look at the kind of stuff related to people engaged in moving or transporting goods in the 18th century, right? So you have these waterways running from north to south. Now it is north to south Kerala, but as far as 18th century was concerned, these were different small kingdoms and so on. Now we have a historian like Leonard Bess, B.E.S., who is a Dutch historian who is doing research on small kingdoms of Kerala, like right from north to south, because the Dutch have been very active in engaging in trade and commerce with all these small kingdoms, across the coast of Kerala, and they have accumulated a large variety of primary source materials related to the small kingdoms and their role in trade and commerce. Now, if Subhash wants to look at the movement of goods, these materials in the form of maps as well as reports available in the Dutch archive become extremely useful because it has the description of goods being moved. Now I draw your attention to a recent book by Dr. Abhilash Malayil, historian, which is on Rayatwari in Malabar. But then you get a very interesting description about the inland navigation trade, particularly in agricultural products. And these agricultural products and their histories are very important. I draw your attention to, for example, the writings of historian like Rabi Aravind Palat, who talked about rice production and accumulation. Now, rice production, accumulation, etc., would mean that the materials that are being produced here, in this case rice, enters market, it creates surplus value. So therefore, when Subhash looks at the question of moving goods, so he is not just looking at completely sacked and well protected goods being carried from one end of Kerala to another. That's not alone he is looking at. He will be looking at the production as well, and how these commodities really enter this network of exchange. So therefore, when you look for primary sources, that's where we began with. There are many ways in which these primary sources will yield a lot of information to us. Something which could be mind-boggling, which we may not have thought about when we really began our research. This is a point I want to drive home. Right? Now let us look at, what about secondary sources? This is again a term familiar. Now, for someone who is engaged in ethnographic research, what are the primary sources? That's a debatable point. Depending on the nature of the discipline, this might change. So, some of the things which are primary sources for historians would be secondary sources for other disciplines, because they would say these are all written materials published and things of that kind. But for historians, even if they are written, printed, and etc., they are primary because these reports have been written at the time when the kind of events or processes that we are talking about had been happening. So, in a way, the contemporaneity of the material is what makes it primary for historians. And then, how far it is removed from, how far the sources are removed from the actual occurrence of the events, that would determine what historians would refer to as secondary materials. This is a kind of hard and fast division that usually we make in historical research. I think that is acceptable, and this example gives you quite a interesting kind of entry into that. Now let me just also draw your attention to the notion of archive, because in critical social sciences, there are many ways in which the term archive itself is used. The Foucauldian way, it's not the kind of implication that we have when you talk as a historian's archive, right? So that's more in terms of a text and the kind of statements and other kinds of things that can form an archive. But the larger implications would be useful for historians, because you want to deal with your archive in a critical way for following this Foucauldian notion. But then the most interesting aspect of it will be to argue that, you see, the archive is not something that is used to give a certain kind of reference alone, Usually that's what those of us in history research would be forced to think of. We might think that initially what we are doing is, we are giving some references. By way of that, we talk about the authenticity of the things that we really show. But what are the other compulsions? So as we proceed further, you will see that an archive would mean much more than a repository of sources which would be used for giving references. It is not that. Basically, you will read archive following what we discussed yesterday, against the grain, thinking how this archive was created, what made the creation of this. Suppose if you are reading a report of 18th century or 19th century or 20th century, or even a report like, tell me some examples of some reports that made flurry in Kerala recently. Some report, any report that might come to your mind. You can think about why that. The question is, we as historians or social scientists would ask is, why that report was written, who wrote that report, what are the implications of that, what would it mean to think about these reports. So the same thing is applicable to any historical kind of information also, Now, okay, so what I am saying is that when I talk about primary sources, etc., and also huge number of government papers available in archives. As a researcher, when all of us go, our concern will be to see how each of those reports are ultimately the product of a certain kind of knowledge and power. So you can bring in the social science notion, Foucauldian notion to think about, in the sense that, for example, if in a report a certain community's name is used in a particular way, so you may want to ask, why this particular name? Does it have any connotation to the economic activity in which this community is engaged in? Like that. Or else you see the log books of the ship, if you want to look at. If you are a historian working on some other aspects of movement of commodities, and you are working with this sort of materials, then you will see that suddenly these log books information is very important in terms of the movement of commodities, men and materials across the globe or in a particular region. So therefore, what I want to say is that when you read a government report or a report of a commission of inquiry and whatever you want to read, so try to understand this material as something of a site of contestation, because there are different kinds of what I can say, different kind of linguistic expression in a record, which is very specific to that particular period of time, and that expression itself is something that we need to talk about. It's not that suppose I say that 80,000 tons of 80,000 tons of let's say pepper was transported at one point of time from this particular place to that particular place. That report is there. But as you go on reading, then the question is, why this pepper was transported at that particular point of time, who actually bought this pepper, and what is the use of that. And in fact, Romila Thapar was the historian who used this very interesting expression, black gold for pepper. Now, which would mean that we know the significance of gold across human history. And the other day, you must have read in some international news site that I forgot the place where somebody broke open a museum and carried away some 2,500-year-old gold helmet, which was used in the army, right? It's a precious thing and it's a very heavy one, and that much gold means a lot of money, right? So gold has been there for a very long period of time, not just in this part of the world. Now I was, when I worked at KCHR, I was custodian of all these materials dug out from Pattanam. It was very nice to see the gold strings and many other things excavated from that historical site, kept in my office. So I wanted to see this. And because I was a director of that institution, I could ask my colleagues, request my colleagues to open it and show me. And it is all, quite well documented, the length and breadth and weight of this gold stuff which is kept there. What I am saying, this is a 2,000-year-old thing. So which means that across this coast, as early as that time of Pattanam, people valued valued gold as a very great thing. So if you look at these kinds of traces that you find in museum or in an archive, then we need to understand how people understood the value of materials. Now in the example of pepper I mentioned, so this would mean that there is an exchange value for pepper, and that is something very much contested. So most of this documentation that we have today would be related to the Portuguese Dutch period, or even before, something even before that. In fact, this is my last point in relation to this. I chanced to read some archival materials which were on exhibition at one point in time in Cambridge University Library. So the Genesis records, if you have any idea of this, these are the old records which survived in the Jewish depositories. Some of them came from Egypt actually, and we have references to merchants engaged in lot of international trade with western coast of India, which means Kerala and all that. And many people used to travel to this side to transport all this, and they have accumulated huge amount of this written material about the transportation, and you have all sorts of people engaging in this kinds of research, trade and commerce, and generating documents, and these documents get deposited in synagogues, and they have very interesting kind of history how this happened and all that. So I request you to Google it and read. You get a very interesting kind of idea about how the archive is actually created, almost unknowingly. So people never knew that they were creating an archive in that way. So you have very fancy way in which primary sources get accumulated, something which happens without being really aware of it. So this is a point I wanted to say. Now, what about the evidence of historians? So this is important when you want to write about something. So if you have a theme that you want to pursue in your research and write about it, what does a historian do, or what do historians generally do? A historian does it in a very particular way. So he wants to see, or she wants to see, who has created these sources. The question which I raised just now, the origin of these sources. Where was these sources? If you want to look at some documents that have survived as part of Genesis records, you want to know where actually these documents were created. Now, let's say the Genesis records could be quite distant for most people here. But let's take some stuff which British administrators wrote from here, or some missionaries wrote from here. These are things which often we find as being produced, or something that during the period of national liberation movement, something that the leaders of movements wrote, or the ordinary people wrote and published, or newspaper articles published in newspapers like Madhrubhumi in Malabar, etc. So you can bring in any number of similar examples to see how this can be talked about. So the question is, where I'm just checking time. The origin of these sources, right? Who created it? Where was it written, and things like that. Then we look at why was it produced. For instance, if you have, I draw your attention to some Malayalam stuff. You have this, couple of volumes that brought together primary materials of Vaikam Satyagraha, because I am taking this example, this has been discussed about very recently. Mostly, the articles that were published in newspapers of that time. I draw your attention to one book which is edited by P.K. Hari Kumar, and the other one was by the State Archives Department. So you can take a look at this. One is mostly government materials, I think. This archives publication of the Department of Archives. Whereas the other one, edited by P.K. Hari Kumar, which is a compilation of almost all available newspaper materials published on Vaikam Satyagraha. Now, if as a historian you are working on Vaikam Satyagraha, there are many historians who worked on this, including Western scholars, Mary King, etc., who worked on Vaikam Satyagraha. Many of them have gone through this sort of materials. Now, when you read this, or you along with that, if you want to read Mahadeva Desai's, that Epic of Travancore book, which actually gives you an interesting idea about Gandhi's own visit to this side during that time, right? So each and every place that he had been to, actually he takes a train through Kottayam, he meets up with people in Changannur and all these places, including I think Kottayam. Then he goes to Vaikam and has that historic interview with Indanturital Nambiadiri. And this is something which has been reproduced in many historical and social science books. That conversation between that Sanadini Nambudiri and Mahatma Gandhi, Nambiadiri, so he is referred to. So you have, three sources that I just mentioned here. I'm sure that these books are available in this library. So when you can check and see and read these three sources together and see how, if you want to talk about Vaikam Satyagraha, these contemporary materials or primary materials of that time give you a real understanding of the events that have been spoken about. This is what generally historians do. And no matter what period you are talking about. I took examples from modern history, which is an area that I work with. This you can use if you are a medieval historian, using materials in Persian language or Arabic and other kinds of languages. Same thing could be done. So in the case of historians, that's what much more experienced people would say. It is always important that we at least learn 3-4 languages, which is a really difficult thing. And I had the fortune to meet some people, good historians working on Kerala, but they have tremendous command over different languages, Portuguese, Dutch, and Spanish, which means that you can access almost anything on the history of Kerala if you know these languages, or history of India of the colonial period. But in our case, we are constrained by two languages, English and Malayalam mostly. These are the languages with which we can work, and that one has a limit. The moment you are able to read Portuguese or Dutch or Spanish, etc., then you get a very different idea about the colonial empire, colonial policies, and so on. So, which means that you can really do a global history of colonialism, because you can read materials generated in West Africa, or you can read materials generated on southern region of Africa, or any part of this colonial world, including South America. So that will give you a wide variety of choices in terms of your historical profession. And sources in these languages, I don't want to elaborate further on this. And basically these are the questions that we ask to the historians. We as practitioners of history ask to the evidences. Now, so what about, this, the practice of history. Historian is not a judge. I want to say this because when I say this, I have in my mind a very interesting kind of formulation by Carlo Ginzburg. I haven't given that name here in this slide, but those who are interested may not. Carlo Ginzburg, when he talks about, he's a very interesting Italian historian. So he talks about the question of evidentiary paradigm, evidences for historians. Now, history can be written only with evidences. Suppose if I say something, you can ask me what are the evidences for my statement, or anybody can question a researcher who says something in terms of, what evidence, or we can ask him or her to provide the evidences. Now, that's evidences. In Ginsburg's case, we will revisit this idea. But tell us that, well, historians' job is to look at the past in the way in which, a judge looks at a certain event of the past, right? But historian stops short of making any judgment. It is not the job of historians. Like for a judge, what is the job of a judge? Ultimately, if a judge says that, oh, I am not going to make any judgment, he will be thought of as a poor judge, right? Even after listening to both sides, both sides of the argument of a case, ultimately a judge has to pronounce his or her verdict. But what does a historian do? Historian, like the job of a judge, he actually marshals through evidences. He engages with a wide variety of evidences, but he doesn't give a final verdict on this. This is a big difference, because the idea of historian is to ask questions. You can give an answer if you want to, right? If you are interested in giving answers, you can give. But fundamentally, I guess it is true for all social sciences. By and large, it is true that the fundamental thing is to ask questions. And so therefore, the first thing we began with, something if already done, some problem that already has been researched, then the point is that when we start again a research on the same problem, we are asking new question. So our understanding of the past becomes far deeper when we ask new and newer questions. How much fresh questioning is possible is in fact the central problem there. Now then, when it comes to writing, you can, these are all really interesting aspects of the practice of a historian. So when you write an essay or a dissertation or whatever you want to write, so historians use a certain kind of language. So some would say that, well, you have to use active voice when you write. You see in all the kind of suggestions you get, the style of writing has to be, the active voice. Then history being something that has happened. I know that, you can, people would say, don't make it appear as something that has not happened. So generally, but it's a very tricky thing, because it's not that you always speak in past tense. You can speak in present tense, but it is sometimes, an earlier past form, or the moment you start talking about something that has happened, you can also talk about that as something that is part of your own narrative. And for the style of the narrative, the conventions of grammar could be changed. So you need not always remain as somebody who writes in past tense. But then the moment you enter that language domain of understanding your problem of history, the problem that you deal with, then the restrictions of these expressions definitely change. And therefore, you will find that historians really come out with a fascinating kind of language. This happens, I guess, when you write ethnography as well. So something which happens in an ethnographic present. So there is a back and forth movement of the tenses. In fact, if you read very closely, whether a historian's work or an ethnographist social anthropological work, then you will see that the usual textbook language conventions, they don't adhere to, right? So because if you can talk about Gandhi in the present tense as well, isn't it? It is possible. So that's what I am saying. So in some kind of guidelines, people talk about this sort of language problem as well. Okay, leaving that there, we have a lot of questions about generalization. Now, take examples when you do a field work as an ethnographer, ethnographic researcher, you go to a field, you talk with people, you collect a lot of data and all that. And then when you start writing, what will happen is that we really need to, as I said earlier, we are not going to make, judgments. We stop short of making judgments, but we may want to show how things have happened. But then we don't just stop there, It is not just that we show how things happened. We write it in such a way that those who read what we write really understand how things happened. This is a very tricky thing, one can tell you, suppose when you say write something, it is not a non-committed writing that we are engaged in. So in the second part, when you talk about, these writing ethnography or subaltern lives and stuff of that kind, these kinds of things really come in. If you want to write something, you write it in such a way that, as per the kind of evidentiary paradigm that you have, this is the kind of conclusion. But it never omits other kinds of possibilities. This is a very big problem, in fact. So this will land up in the terrain of understanding the question of truth in history, because if you write something, if I write something, there are ways in which we can contradict each other. And that contradiction would come as much as, that contradiction would come in terms of the kind of evidences that we have. And we are not going to resolve this contradiction, but this contradiction will remain there as long as both of us working on same area depend on the kind of sources that we have and also the kind of interpretation that we are engaged in. So therefore, what will happen is that the first problem that we began with, still I have a chance to again to begin this, right? You take the example of Vaikam Satyagraha. And I am sure that another 100 researchers can do research on this, right? Even if you are not getting new primary sources, I think even if without new primary sources, I'm sure that another generation of scholars can actually write on these kinds of things. This is a point I wanted to say. So, generalization here would mean the kind of conclusion that you arrive in a way. But ultimately, the larger kind of truth claim that a scholar can make. That's what coming out of generalization. So we have to go a little bit slow, in the sense that we have to be really concerned about the arguments that we make. Now, probably you can give me a lot of examples. I just leave it there. Yeah, so not being judgmental, then of course presentism, anachronism and things like that. Now some of the things I tell you very, very what I can say, complex arguments that we make. Certain ideas that today we have in our mind, about certain historic personalities. How much justified we are in offering a criticism of the individuals, events, etc. of the past. This is something that researchers in history has to be aware of, right? So how do we do that? This is a big challenging thing. I give you a very contemporary and a volatile example. Everybody criticizes Nehru. At least you have quite a number of people criticizing Nehru, right? You read this in newspapers and everywhere. So how do we do that as historians? As students of history, it is something very different from a critique of the politics and policies of an individual who really shaped the destiny of India. And that is different from criticism which is uncalled for as a person, because this debate is very important, particularly in the context of some of the recent books that have been published on Nehru. From both sides of the political, from the liberal left position, you have the recent book by JNU historian. I forgot his name. Not Neeladri. What's the other historian? Modern specialization. Okay, I will recollect that name. So he has published a very recent book on Jawaharlal Nehru. And so he takes the sides showing Aditya Mukherjee. I'm just trying to recollect. So Aditya Mukherjee has this book on Nehru, where he talks about how significant was Nehru's contribution. So whereas we have quite a number of people from the extreme right-wing politics of India, and the BJP and RSS, etc., always coming out with a different kind of characterization of Nehru. Now, as students of history, when you read Nehru's works, major writings of Nehru, I'm not talking about the multi-volume book which S. Gopal edited, which are all the correspondence of Nehru with chief ministers and so on. There are huge compilations by historian S. Gopal. So we have I think most of those volumes in this library here. So the presentist argument to understand a figure of the past becomes really difficult. Now it is true when you go back in history, for any figure of history, whether the bigger villains of the past or the let us say monumental figures whom we consider as great figures across history, the history of any region, any nation, any country. So the problem of historian is often enough to offer a critique rather than a wild criticism. This is what I am saying. So we can debate this point. Now this is important when we write history as to how we treat historical subject. How do we treat historical subject? It is not, now this you can take up at the time of discussion. And meanwhile, if you want a tea break, we can also break. And who is controlling me? Abhilash, what is the time? It is already 11:21. I checked time and, it's not fair to make people sit in an idle way. And yeah, so you can tell me when to break. So the problem of history writing in this particular context is to see how we treat our historical subject. Particularly when individuals are involved here. As I said, what are the themes of history? You feel tired. Fair enough. You have every right to be tired. So you have to think about this. We are talking about processes, individuals, events, and greater structures. Whatever is historians' forte, we are trying to talk about that. So the point is how we treat these themes when we write. So think about this. How are we going to treat this? So probably we can break for tea for a while, because I think it is unfair to talk too much. Thank you. I just stop here. So you hold on to these points and we can revisit.
Everybody back to the seat. ഇന്ന് മഹാത്മാഗാന്ധിജിയുടെ ഡെത്ത് ആനിവേഴ്സറിയാണ്. ഫോർ പേയിങ് ഹോമേജ് ടു ഗാന്ധിജി നമുക്ക് 1 മിനിറ്റ് സൈലൻ്റായിട്ട് എഴുന്നേറ്റ് നിൽക്കാം. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so before we start, if you have any kind of issues to be raised, we can have a discussion. That will be good, rather than being monologic. It's not always nice to do that. Yeah, please. You want to say something? Yeah, John. Okay, sure. Yeah.
എനിക്കൊന്ന് മാഷ് ഒരു മൊണോലോഗ് ആയിട്ട് നമുക്ക് കണ്ടിന്യൂ ചെയ്യണമെന്ന് നിർബന്ധമില്ല. ഇപ്പം മാഷ് പറഞ്ഞ 2-3 കാര്യങ്ങൾക്ക് നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഇഫ് യു വാണ്ട് ടു ഇൻ്റർഫിയർ വിത്ത് ദോസ് പോയിൻറ്റ്സ്, if you're interested, you can make your own arguments and sort of idea we could share, and we'll have a debate on that. We'll not only debate, we'll have some more meaningful conversation we'll have. അപ്പോൾ ഞാൻ നോട്ട് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ള 1-2 കാര്യങ്ങൾ ഇതാണ്. ഒന്ന്, ഈ ജഡ്ജ്മെൻ്റലാവാതെ തന്നെ നമ്മുടെ ഒരു റിസർച്ചിനകത്ത് എങ്ങനെയാണ് നമ്മുടെ തന്നെ ഒരു മൈ ഓൺ പെർസ്പെക്റ്റീവ്, മൈ ഓൺ ഇൻവോൾവ്മെൻറ്റ്. ഇപ്പം മാഷ് പറഞ്ഞ 2 കാര്യങ്ങളാണ്. ഒന്ന്, ഈ പറഞ്ഞ ഈ റാഷണലി ഓഫ് ദി റിസർച്ചിനകത്ത് നമ്മുടെ തന്നെ എങ്ങനെയാണ് മൈ ഓൺ ഇൻവോൾവ്മെൻറ്റ്, അത് ഒരു റിസർച്ചർ കണ്ടെത്തേണ്ടതാണ് അല്ലേ. ഇപ്പോൾ മാഷ് തന്നെ പറയുന്നുണ്ട്, വൈക്കം സത്യാഗ്രഹത്തിൽ ഒരു 100 ഗവേഷണ കാര്യങ്ങളും കൂടെ സാധ്യമാണ്, ഗവേഷണം കൂടെ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പേപ്പർ കൂടെ സാധ്യമാണ് സെയിം സോഴ്സസിനെ വെച്ചിട്ട് അല്ലേ. അപ്പം നമുക്ക് പലപ്പോഴും ഉള്ള ചിന്തയാണ്, ഇപ്പം ഈ MA ഡിസർട്ടേഷൻകാർ പിള്ളേരെപ്പോഴും ചോദിക്കുന്നതാണ്, എന്താണ് എല്ലാവരും ഒരുപാട് പേര് പഠിച്ച കാര്യമാണ്, ഇനി എന്ത് പഠിക്കാനാണ്, സ്ഥിരമായിട്ട് വരുന്നൊരു കാര്യമാണ്. അപ്പോൾ സെയിം സോഴ്സസിനെ ഉപയോഗിച്ച് നമ്മുടെ വ്യൂ പോയിൻ്റ് എങ്ങനെ അതിനകത്ത് കണ്ടെത്താൻ പറ്റും, സെയിം സോഴ്സസിനെ വെച്ചിട്ട് നിങ്ങളുടെ റോള് സെയിം പഠന മേഖലയിലേക്ക് എങ്ങനെ കൊണ്ടുവരാൻ പറ്റും, ഇതൊരു വലിയ ചോദ്യം തന്നെയാണ്. പെട്ടെന്ന് നമുക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു ഒരുപാട് പേര് റിസർച്ച് ചെയ്തുകൊണ്ട് നമ്മളെല്ലാം പുതിയ ടോപ്പിക്ക് കണ്ടെത്താനുള്ളൊരു വലിയ എന്താണ് അവസാനം പിന്നെ ഇപ്പം ഞാൻ തന്നെ പലരുമായിട്ട് ഇൻവോൾവ് ചെയ്യുന്നതുകൊണ്ട് എനിക്കറിയാം. ഇത് ഒരുപാട് പേര് പഠിച്ചതാണ്. ഒരുപാട് പേര് പഠിച്ചതിനകത്തും വീണ്ടും ഒരു സാധ്യതയെ പറ്റിയാണ് മാഷ് പറയുന്നതെന്ന് എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു. അപ്പോൾ എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു ഇത്തരം കാര്യങ്ങളെ പറ്റിയിട്ട് വേണമെങ്കിൽ കുറച്ചുകൂടെ ഡിസ്കഷൻസ്. അപ്പം എന്താണ്, ഫീൽ ഫ്രീ ആൻഡ് യു സേ യുവർ ഓൺ പോയിന്റ്സ് ആൻഡ് റിമാർക്സ് ഓൺ ദാറ്റ്, അല്ലേ? അപ്പം അതാകുമ്പോൾ കുറച്ചുകൂടെ കുറച്ചുകൂടി ഇൻട്രാക്റ്റീവ് ആവും. ദെൻ മാഷ് വിൽ കണ്ടിന്യൂ. ആർക്കാണ് ആരാണ് തുടങ്ങുക? കീർത്തന വിൽ സ്റ്റാർട്ട്.
എന്താ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ? ഇവിടെ ഈ അനാക്രോണിസം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഈ നമ്മളെ ബാബരി മസ്ജിദ് രാമക്ഷേത്രമാണെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ് സ്ഥാപിച്ചെടുക്കുന്ന അതുപോലത്തെ ഒരു ഇതാണോ?
Anachronism, we can give a lot of examples. Like some people would say that India is the mother of democracy. That's a humbug. You see, it has never been a democratic society, but for a variety of reasons, people are talking like that. So no democracy ever existed here. So from the both from the political right as well as from the what I can say, liberal political right. So how do you characterize a gentleman like Shashi Tharoor? So he said, he wrote a longish article in the Hindu, saying that India was actually the mother of democracy. And actually he quotes some stuff by R.C. Majumdar and another that generation historian, who talked about the sort of democratic institutions in ancient India and stuff like that. These are the two sources that they have been quoting. But you have very huge scholarship on ancient Indian society that talks about the kind of divisions existing in India historically, and also the kind of domination, subordination, and things like that. I think you teach ancient Indian history here, no? You teach, huh? It is here. So if you have read people like R.S. Sharma, I don't know if you have read R.S. Sharma? Yeah, so he has a very interesting book, Aspects of Ideas and Political Institutions in Ancient India. So if you read that, he actually offers a critique of all this. And not just that, R. Sharma has done extensive research on this, talking about different kinds of political institutions that had existed in India. And no serious historian has brought out examples to show that democracy did exist here. This is what actually happened. But suddenly, somebody says that India is the mother of democracy. Sensible people can only laugh, but others cannot. Not laugh. Sensible people can only weep. That's the whole thing. But insensible people keep on writing about it, and they say that India was a big democracy and stuff like that. So that is a good example of anachronistic kind of arguments. And there are many, as you said in the case of this, there is a lot of anachronism. Suppose you say that looking at all this old Sabha Samadhi and stuff of that kind you read in ancient Indian history, can we say that parliament existed? The kind of thing I told you. So these are different, and even actually, the whole idea of notion of majority and minority in India, that is also an anachronism, because majority can exist the way it is existing only in a democratic system where enumeration has taken place, where people are actually enumerated for various purposes of governmentality. So if that has not happened, you cannot talk about this. So there was no idea of a majority or minority in the medieval or ancient times. So this is what I am saying. You read the writings of people like Rajesh, Nadvi, or Ranabir Chakrabarti. These are very good historians who wrote on this sort of things. Nadvi's work, actually, he talks about all these medieval state formations and things like that. There are a lot of good historians who worked on this sort of things, and they would tell us that no such notion existed in the ancient times. And also the kind of ideas about, many people commit this, even from the liberal historians also. They can talk about like secularism existing in the time. I don't know this. I am not a specialist of medieval Indian history, but I do read some of these books, and I feel that a lot of anachronism could exist. Like if you want to talk about some person as a bigot, you have many such examples in history. So basically you want to judge a ruler as a politician, right? Not as somebody who was championing the cause of one religion or the other. They have been committing a lot of mistakes, but these were part of the mistakes any politician would commit. And look at the politicians today, what sort of nonsense they are doing. I don't want to name politicians. You just imagine from your daily reading of newspapers how much stupidities are committed by politicians. And the same kind of, or same amount or little more must have been committed by politicians of the past, any country for that matter. So how as students of history we understand this? So we need to offer a critique of that. But then we have to think about that many measures of the past were different from what we have today. But it doesn't mean that we cannot offer a critique of the past. That problem which Dr. Joby said, you still have a chance to do research on this, right? So that is perhaps the possibility of history. Even as 100 biographies of X or Y person is written, it doesn't mean that I cannot attempt a biography if I am interested in writing biography. But similarly, as you can take any example to show that. So I just cut short here. We can, this sort of discussion should continue. It doesn't stop. For want of time, I just stop. But I guess in your group, you can continue to discuss and read. Yeah.
വേറെ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻസ് ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ നമുക്ക് ചോദിക്കാം. ജസ്റ്റ് ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻസ് എന്നുള്ളതല്ല കേട്ടോ, ഒരു ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻസ് അല്ല, ജസ്റ്റ് സുരേഷ്.
സർ, ഈ നോട്ട് ബീയിങ് ജഡ്ജ്മെൻ്റൽ എന്നുള്ളത് അതൊരു ഒബ്ജക്റ്റിവിറ്റീൻ്റെ ഒരു ഇതായിട്ടല്ലേ വരുന്നത്? പിന്നെ അതുപോലെ തന്നെ നമ്മുടെ ആർഗ്യുമെൻ്റ് ഡെവലപ്പ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് ഒരു തരം ജഡ്ജ്മെൻ്റ് ഭാഗമായിട്ടല്ലേ? അപ്പോൾ അതെങ്ങനെയാണ്? അതേ സമയത്ത് തന്നെ ഈ സബ്ജക്റ്റിവിറ്റിയുടെ കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ വരുന്നുണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ എങ്ങനെയാണ്?
Not being judgmental, to begin with, we are saying that we are not going to be judgmental. But the way you write and where you practice your discipline as a historian, then ultimately it will amount to that. Suppose you see there are certain historical events about which you cannot write without taking a position. But the moment you start doing that, you have to give all the evidences for that. And that evidences will speak for whatever you want to say. And that is how the kind of interpretation that you give becomes. Sometimes it carries certain elements of judgment in it. But you are not judgmental per se. You are not beginning with a certain kind of judgment to say that, such and such individually was bad. I mean, that individual must have been definitely bad. But, you need to write a history of a particular event or a personality or processes, etc., in such a way that you can also show how you have arrived at this. So this is, what ultimately happens is that there is a great deal of something like a tight rope walking, you have to do that. And that's where your integrity as a scholar is maintained, even as you offer a critique of a particular individual or an event. So therefore, the idea is that even as you are not being judgmental per se to begin with, ultimately the way you write it and you show why you write in this particular way, definitely it carries a moral voice. I am not saying that you should write without any moral voice being part of what you are doing. Definitely it will be there. You will have some observations of your own. But that observations have their own kind of rationale. You can prove that, you can show how you arrived at this, and it is in that sense that the objectivity is maintained. This is what I am saying. There are a lot of such examples, particularly in history. I think more in history, because history is a place where you have all these are being contested. There is a lot of contest taking place, and therefore it's a real problem in many societies. It becomes really difficult, and not just in India. In fact, there is a lot more war as far as history is. War in terms of history that is happening today, not just in India, in many parts of the world. People, some kind of state-centric kind of narrative of history becomes at some point very important, and at another point of time that can be contested. This has happened. So I think we need to really look at that, particularly when you look at this national histories. This happens. Now, how can we write a history of genocides if you want to do that? And not just here. In most parts of the world, genocides have been happening. Can we write a history of that in a very clinical way? It's not possible. You have to account for the dead. Right? So therefore, I think there you are not a historian, dispassionate, and all that. I think this is a big challenge. So that one we really do in terms of our practice. Like many scholars write about the partition of India. So I'm sure that as part of modern history you are teaching that and you are learning that. How do we study that? How do we talk about that? Right? So similar things, we have to think about. A lot of scholars have written on this. And take similar examples and see how. And I know at least two people very closely, who had written on Gujarat pogrom, and they did a lot of field work in Gujarat, to write this. These are good ethnographic kind of stuff which they wrote. And they have undergone severe strain to collect data, to do this, etc., etc. And ultimately, they came out with a very good, a very good work. So, so these are one. I can name the authors. You may Google it and find out. Google their names. One is Mayuk Chatterjee, and the other person is Hassan Fachandi, Ghassan, Gasam Fachandi. So you have this kinds of very committed kind of ethnographic writings on genocide. It's from India, but we have from various other parts of the world people writing about all this. So we can continue this. I mean, since now we don't have much time, I just stop here. If there are any more discussion points to be raised, we can. I will be happy to listen to you. One minute.
So the Mayuk that you have referred, like he was my professor, and he was first one to tell me that you should not be calling Gujarat riots, it's riots, and he called it as massacre. And
genocide.
No, he called it as massacre.
Yeah.
And he said that it is euphemizing when you call it as riot, and you termed it as pogrom. Like, on what basis was that wordings coming in? And I'm just amused, you were the first person I have been hearing calling it as a pogrom and not as a massacre or as a riot.
Well, I think what did I say? I said genocide.
You said
Pogrom, yeah. What happens is that, what was Mayuk's argument? It is not pogrom.
Mayuk said that you should not be calling it as a riot. Because
I never use it as a riot. It was not riot. Because see, what happens is that, I know that debate because I was very much with him when he wrote this, so we used to discuss these things. So the idea is that this whole debate on pogrom, genocide, etc., has been there for a very long time in social sciences. Like we have this American professor Gregory Stanton, who actually talked about that Rwandan genocide, and we have the timeline that he had given kind of social scientific premonition or prediction of this sort of thing. In a program where you have the definite function of the state as a provider of the conditions for all these things to take place. And what about riots? Riots are, let us say, lower intensity. I don't know if that is the right way of putting it. Lower intensity kind of occurrences of violence unleashed in a very calculated way. In fact, these a few weeks ago, there was a release of book at IUCSSR. Even Irfan Ahmed had come to speak about this. You were there, I don't know. Yeah. So in that book, we get a timeline of this sort of things for the last 10 years or so. And yesterday or day before, we had this report of violence on Christians in various parts of India. So these sort of things are happening. So the ground is being prepared by which people become really insensitive to this large-scale unleashing of violence. But when you have the state intervention in a very big way, creating the conditions for the large-scale extermination of people, the condition of pogrom actually gets activated. So that's what it is. That's what it is happening. Now, the question is how do we write about it? So the writing there, definitely as you go on writing this, it is almost like you want to give a ethnography of this violence. And we have, if you really look at that, in Indian social sciences. You have Sudhir Kakar and many others who talked about, in his famous book Colors of Violence, he has been talking about that. And many other scholars have done this kind of research. So there is a huge debate in that particular area. And now today when I go to field to do research on this sort of things, how will I do that? So we are not keeping a clinical, the kind of objectivity and all that. We are not doing that. We become part of these people who had suffered this, and we write about it. And in fact, internationally also this is the thing. Those. I mean, we can debate all this, but the case of Jewish extermination during the Second World War. I mean, that's a different story, but have we learned anything? This is my last point. It is for us to discuss and understand. The fact of the matter is that the Jewish state is doing exactly the same thing. And that is being justified by pointing to the fact that the Jews had suffered this. But it does not validate that. If you really, in fact, I mean, it will take a long time. But I don't want to bring in biographical details into that. So let us move forward. If there are other points, but we can have a private conversation. It will take time.
നമ്മളിപ്പോൾ സംസാരിച്ച ടീ ബ്രേക്കിന് സംസാരിച്ച് തന്നെയായിരുന്നു ഈ എത്തനോഗ്രഫിയുടെ നമ്മൾ ഈ പാസ്റ്റ് ടെൻസ് പ്രസൻ്റ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞല്ലോ, അത് കുറച്ചുകൂടെ ഇപ്പം ഞാനൊരു എക്സാമ്പിൾ പറഞ്ഞാൽ ഞാൻ സ്ട്രീറ്റ് വെൻഡേഴ്സിലാണ് വർക്ക് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ വെൻഡേഴ്സിനെ അവരുടെ ഒരു സ്പേഷ്യൽ അറ്റാച്ച്മെൻ്റ് ഉണ്ടല്ലോ, അപ്പോൾ അത് കാലങ്ങളായിട്ട് വന്നിട്ടുള്ളൂ. അതിനിടയിലാണ് അർബൻ ബ്യൂട്ടിഫിക്കേഷനും അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഈ പറഞ്ഞ ഒരു ഇൻഫ്രാസ്ട്രക്ചർ ഡെവലപ്മെൻറ്റും സ്മാർട്ട് സിറ്റി അങ്ങനെയുള്ളൊരു പ്രോസസ്സ് വരുന്നത്. അപ്പം അവരുടെ ആ ഒരു നറേഷൻ ഉണ്ടല്ലോ, അവർ ഇന്നോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഈ അടുത്ത കാലത്ത് വന്നത് കാലങ്ങളായിട്ട് ജനറേഷനായിട്ടും വന്നിട്ടുള്ള ആളുകളുണ്ടല്ലോ. അപ്പോൾ ആ ഒരു നറേഷനെ നമ്മളെങ്ങനെയാണ് പ്രോസസ്സ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്, ഇല്ലെങ്കിൽ എഴുതുന്നതിൻ്റെ രീതി പ്രസൻ്റ് ആവുന്ന എങ്ങനെയാണ്?
Okay. You see, when you want to talk about this, what I said is that that's a narrative strategy basically, whether you want to put it as everything in past, that's a narrative strategy. But the moment you step into this practice of writing, when you start writing, you are no longer constrained by that. You can go into the present of the past, you can step into the present of that particular people when they really live their lives and narrate that, and this language convention can be overcome. That problem can be really, so it's a kind of back and forth movement as far as narrative is concerned. Suppose you read any historian, you will see that this is the way they write about. You see larger narratives, for example, of social movements, history of social movements or national liberation movements, etc. You see this language convention of moving across genres and resolving it at the level of narrating things. When you narrate, like for instance, you said the street vendors have been living there in that particular area. Whichever, where is your fieldwork located in? Thiruvananthapuram, yeah. So definitely people have been living there and they have their own narrative about that place. So that you have this everyday life of these people being centered on that particular area, and probably they were living there for a long time and things like that. Now when they have their narrative of that place, a different kind of urban anthropological narrative of this urban say street or that location emerges. Absolutely, that definitely happens there. But then what happened to that place where they are? That in both ways place making and space making happens there. That's what I think. So today when there is a multiple claim on this urban space. Like street vendors could be evicted from there for development purposes, etc., etc. Then their claim to that place is gone for good. So it never returns to them. That claim, they cannot stake claim on that particular area. Now we have a lot of research on this highly fluid kind of urban space. As far as street vendors are concerned, I think unlike obviously we have, although the scale of which is limited, this street vending and the speciality question is there in most parts of most cities and towns of Kerala. But I think we do have a lot of studies on this street life in Calcutta, for example, which has a very long, which is mind-boggling in terms of the the number of street vendors and the wares that they sell over there. So incomparable in certain ways. So in such situations, people have been studying about the speciality, how people continuing with their economic activity look at this footpath as a major center of activity as far as they are concerned, and they are not constrained by the urban conventions or the conventions of the state. And this is something in certain, although not about the street vendors, we have this in the Politics of the Governed book. Partha Chatterjee talks about the urban squatters, people who have set up their small huts on the railway, the space just outside the railway track in Calcutta. So, and how they are accessing civic amenities, etc., including electricity, water, and all that. So there is a debate about the urban underclass and their space making. I think something similar to that is happening in your example. That's how I think about it. Then when you narrate this, you will evolve certain kind of narrative strategy which will help you to move across these genres of expressions. I don't think that is going to be a big problem, because I just mentioned this because in many of these kind of conventions, people talk about this. But as you step into the shoes of the people who lived in the past, then you enter their present, and then you can really plow through this. Like a farmer who plows through. You can plow through this and write a beautiful ethnography of this. I don't know if I made sense, but I think it is possible. It's not impossible, right? Thank you.
I would like to add a point to this. There is a book, 1,000 Platos. It was published in the year 1980. It is by the French philosopher Deleuze and Guattari. I think it is written as a sequel to Capitalism and Schizophrenia. The name of the book is 1,000 Platos. It is written by the French philosopher Deleuze and Guattari. And in that book, you can find some arguments which can favor your, which might be helpful for your research, 1,000 Platos. In that book, it is said that the main argument of that particular work is that narrative can be fragmented, non-linear. It challenges the narrative. There are some constraints when it comes to narratives in case of spatial theory. In your work, there will be something known as spatial theory. So there are narrative constraints. As we know, there are narrative constraints. Temporal constraints will be there. Physical constraints will be there. Social constraints will be there. Cognitive constraints will be there. 4 kinds of constraints will be there when it comes to applying spatial theory in your research. So, in the work 1,000 Platos by Deleuze and Guattari, it was published in the year 1980. You can find that the main argument is that narrative can be unlimited, it can be fragmented and non-linear. It might be helpful for you. Thank you.
some questions that come in this, if you want to do ethnographic things, the way you want to write about the lives of people who are engaged in this sort of activities in a very fluid space, and where it may be the narrative structure could be different, because the whole idea of fragments, as it is pointed out, if we, in history writing, there is a strong tradition of talking about fragments. In fact, I draw your attention to one article which Gyanendra Pandey wrote. Which Gyanendra Pandey wrote long back in defense of fragments. So basically, building on this argument that you are not looking at a larger narrative of a certain event or certain historical problems, but you can definitely talk about, it's a very momentary thing, you can talk about fragments and then see how these fragments hold on as a particular kind of narrative. You may want to connect that with Partha Chatterjee's other work also, The Nation and its Fragments, because these were very significant interventions in terms of understanding the question of nation states and the way in which it was imagined in India. So, why I bring in this is this question here is once we look at ethnographic practices, and my feeling is that we are not looking possibly at the larger structures, because probably although people talk about questions of everyday state and things like that now, state and its manifestation in everyday life of individuals, people talk about everyday state, for example. But ultimately what will happen is that from the ethnographic point of view, I understand it as mostly dealing with in an effective way possibly fragments, because you are not going to write about the larger structures like you see in political economy or in other branches of specialization, or the work of historians who deal with nation states and global systems and so on. Ethnographers, practice remains at a limited scale. This is what my impression is. I may be very wrong, because you go to, in your case, as you go to the field to interact with people who are in street vending, you are not dealing with a bigger geographical location, isn't it? You are not doing that. So therefore, in most examples of ethnography, we are confined to smaller community. Smaller in the sense that something which is manageable, not in terms of large scale. We are not looking for large scale data. We are looking for something that individual scholar or a group of scholars can manage, and that is much below the scales of a nation state and so on. So this is one point, and this is connected with ethnography as a discipline. Quickly, it is a practice of anthropologists, who have been studying culture. Then that actually takes us to asking this question: what is culture? And I'm sure that it can take many years to really look at this, because what is culture? Culture is always about domination. Culture is always about certain ways of being in the world. If you want to define it, how do you understand this? Mostly it is experienced in terms of the manifestation of social power. But if you look at contemporary discussions, culture is often thought of as religion, isn't it? You cannot, inside a seminar hall you can talk about culture in a dispassionate way. I mean, you are not constrained, but if you really converse with people in other contexts, people think of culture as almost like a religion, which is not the case actually. We need to look at this. So I assume that maybe before late 19th century, we don't hear so much of talk about culture in that sense, right? This is what I have understood. People have not been talking about culture the way we are talking about today. And therefore, when I say that ethnographers are studying cultures, what sort of culture he or she is studying? So we need to collectively ask, what sort of culture? So probably we are looking at everyday manifestation of various practices. I think that's what we are looking. And then eventually we want to go into the details of that, explore the details of this, and then see how can we write about this. Whether it is George Marcuse and many others you have, not Herbert Marcuse. And I have in my mind the book Writing Culture, for example. There's seminal essays that have been brought together in that book. And many other scholars who have been writing about, ethnography, including Rosaldo. And so you have large numbers of scholars doing this sort of critical job. So they all will tell us to focus on this issue of culture. But then, therefore, we also need to have a working definition of that. So this is one issue that I wish to open up. I'm not offering any answer. Thank you, Joby. So we need to. So these are actually, the kind of nitty-gritty of this ethnographic practice, because I'm sure that many people sitting here have done their own kind of field work. Yeah, Suresh, Subhash, and so many others are here, and also the researchers, other researchers here. They are all doing similar kind of research in various fields or various areas of their specialization to collect whatever we think of as very significant for the people as we interact with the ethnographic subjects, quote unquote. And how do we do this? This is a thing that I am talking about. So we do ultimately write about these people. And ethnographers have a very different style of writing, different from historians. Historians seldom would use first-person narratives, right? You know that. You read any history book, you will realize that probably other than the preface, I will not appear there. I have seen. But then if you are if you have followed some ethnographic methods in terms of fieldwork in doing historical research, when it comes to explaining that, and I think I could be there, the first person narrative could be there, but otherwise, in the historian's case, I think the narrative structure, the style of narration is very different. I think that's something that we do. And then, of course, the ethnographers, as many of you have been doing this, there is an engagement with the field. And we have historians also doing that, but of a different kind. Historical fieldwork is slightly different because often enough you are not engaging with, you are not encountering living human beings. That's the thing. But you can also do that if people who are part of certain events you are studying, if they are alive, then it is possible. I don't know if you have similar examples in your mind, like historian Shahid Amin, who wrote on this Chauri Chaura, even metaphor and memory. So he had actually met many people who were part of that. This fieldwork was done long ago, but he himself would refer to it as a historic fieldwork. I heard him talking about that fieldwork in this particular way. So whereas your fieldwork, which you just mentioned in Trivandrum, so you encounter people who are street vendors who are already there. Or, others can also share their own experience of fieldwork, where they really interact with people who are very much part of this event, who themselves are agents in the field. So that makes it, excuse me? Yeah, when you go to the field. Yeah, for historians also, you can say that it's part of empirical research, if I got you correctly. Now, as you go to the field and talk to people, even as it is empirical research, the people are also involved in it. Their subjectivities are involved in it. Right? If you really go and talk with people to know how certain people are affected by certain kind of things. Like yesterday, one of our colleagues said about this 2018 floods. And if you go to the field and talk to people, although we could say it as empirical research, the real experience of people are also involved in it, isn't it? Now, when I did my research, which I published subsequently, I actually encountered a lot of people in the field. So mine is primarily a historical research, but I did also an ethnographic kind of thing. So I went and met with many people who could tell me about certain emotionally charged narratives about slavery. So that particular thing is, I thought, maybe in a preposterous manner, I thought it as ethnographic. I call it as ethnographic. I don't know how real ethnographers would counter that. So I spent a long time listening to these people. I'm not saying it as kind of participate in the classic sense, because these are episodic kind of things, kind of fragmentary stuff. It's not a complete immersion. You have this term like ethnographic immersion or something like that. No, you talk about the guys who go to the field, the researchers go to the field and spend long time, like Argonauts case, where you go and spend 2 years, to talk about this particular island people. That's not what I have done, or I don't know how many people do it like. But I have seen my own friends from the Western universities doing that kind of work, because we are already immersed in here, and it does not demand too much of immersion again. Yet we really need to understand this. It doesn't mean that because we live in Kerala we know everything about Kerala society, isn't it? Still we could be ethnographic outsiders, right? When you want to talk about that. See, I recall the conversation I had with Subhash this morning. Even as I live in Kerala, it doesn't mean that the empirical situation that he was referring to is known to me. All the bits and pieces are known to me, but not in its, not in any historically, what I can say, deep-rooted manner. So that information is a very specialized one, and that we can have only when we really immerse ourselves as researchers in a particular case, context. What historians do is to collect this information through archival research and similar kind of practice, whereas ethnographers, they also do, because if you go to the, Evans Pritchard's statement that once he said, it's important that anthropologists become historical in their perspective in doing research. They also should do archival research like historians. So that's a kind of thing that I want to recall. So what will happen is that, what's that?
When you went to collect data for your own research, so why are you not calling it as an in-depth interview? Were there any other element involved in that specific event to call it as an ethnographic stuff?
So, I think I missed the first part of your question.
No, the method that you have employed to collect the data from your
Yeah.
field, you call it as ethnography.
Yes,
So
right.
my question is that you said it was an interview, I mean, it was an oral narration happening between you
Yeah.
and that person. So why are you not calling it as an in-depth interview? Were there any other element included to call it as an ethnographical research method?
Now what happens is that
ഹിസ്റ്റോറിക്കൽ റിസർച്ചിൽ അങ്ങനെ ഒരു പുസ്തകമുണ്ട്, ഒരു ഹിസ്റ്റോറിക്കൽ റിസർച്ചിൽ ആന്ത്രപ്പോളജിസ്റ്റിൻ്റെ റോൾ എന്നുള്ളത്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ആന്ത്രപ്പോളജിസ്റ്റ് ഇൻ ഹിസ്റ്റോറിക്കൽ റിസർച്ച്.
that title is different. An anthropologist among historians and other essays. That's the title of the book. Thank you for drawing my attention to that. These books are familiar to me, having been in this profession for some time. So what I said is that historians have been doing similar kind of research, although they may not claim themselves doing it as an anthropologist, right? So if you read this Bernard Cohen's book, as you mentioned, you will see that his own studies on the UP village and all that, that is greatly historical actually, Not just him, you have a variety of scholars who worked along with him in many occasions, like Terence Ranger and others. It becomes very difficult to differentiate them between historians and ethnographers or anthropologists. So they have been bringing together all these sensitivities to speak about that. So I am very much aware of this particular crossover, and also the authors who are prominent there. Thank you for drawing my attention to that in this context. But now what I want to respond to what Kirtana said is, what I did, this is what actually Joby wanted me to speak on. As a person trained in historical research, so when I started my research, so I found that, there are some kind of references to slavery, enslavement, etc. in oral narratives. This I knew. Then I wanted to check how much was there in archives, right? So that again I tried to get a relatively convincing kind of information for my work. Then I wanted to see again how much was there in the social memory of people. So when I encountered the question of social memory, that the problem that you raised came up. So it was not a kind of in-depth interview. So it was like observing people, their narratives, their statements, their ritual singing, and on various different occasions. That spanned over a period of time, and that's how I chanced to get at these different kinds of stuff that was there in their social memory. And the method by which I tried to understand the social memory and access some of that, or see, basically trying to record the social memory, that was kind of ethnographic kind of thing. So this is something that I have learned in my own way, not being formally trained by an expert. That's largely because I was also engaged in kind of learning, teaching ethnomethodology and stuff of that kind. This is how that has happened. Now what is the long and short of it is that my own research, which was primarily historical, helped me to branch out to this particular kind of ethnographic research. to know the ways in which the histories of enslavement was there in the social memory of the people. So this is how it happened. So it was much more than what you said, this ethnographic interview, because it spanned over several months, listening to people. Interviews were definitely there, but on the whole, on many occasions, listening to sermons actually, religious sermons, homilies and things of that kind. So those things were happening as part of their schedule. So now I'm just going and listening to that, and then trying to see how a certain kind of history was being rendered through this. Then that history is, I look at similar, to see if there are narratives of similar narratives in the archives. I'm not saying that I'm trying to, give archival validation for this. This is not what I did. So I left both these things to progress in their own way. Archival traces could be there in their own way. The other social memory could be there in its own way. That memories could be there in their own way. So as a researcher, my point was to negotiate this and to write about it. This is the point where I found many people bringing ethnography and history together. That's the kind of thing. I hope I made it clear. But it doesn't mean that the tensions have been completely resolved. The way I did, those things continue to be there. So the moment you have this, and people could say that, oh, you never understood this and so on. I'm not worried about the full understanding of the meanings that have been created and circulated. We may not be able to exhaust all the meanings of that. So in a given condition, how much we are able to do, that's the whole thing, in the given condition. We are not aiming at an ultimate presentation of all this. And so therefore the question remains, another 100 people coming. Yeah? Another 100 people coming and exploring further. That remains there, and they can say, oh, this fellow did some nonsense, that kind of things. So they can disprove what I've been doing. So that possibility remains as far as any research is concerned. Okay, quickly, so the point is, and now I have just mentioned about the question of culture, studying. So that's, we really need to revisit, because culture becomes highly value loaded, and people have a very different notion of what culture is all about. And I think generally, and that's not something unique to India. It's not unique to India. To the extent that if you refer to some of the speeches of Donald Trump after he became US President last week, he was also referring to the fact that the American culture is under attack and so on. Here in India and many other places, people would say that our culture is under attack by American culture, isn't it? They will say that what is that, MTV and other kinds of things, etc. Have been invading us and things like. So who is afraid of whose culture? This problem remains there. Whose culture we are afraid of? Are we really afraid of somebody coming and invading us? And whose culture is? So these are really potential issues that we need to think about. But when you really study ethnographically, I think we are not studying national cultures, because these are huge kind of units that certain aspects probably could be studied ethnographically, but in its entirety, I don't think we are doing a national culture in that sense. But it is something that really we need to look at. What happened? This is the end of it. Okay. So now, look at this writing part of it. Writing part of it is, it actually although we can suggest, like for instance, there are several kinds of suggestions, like how to write an assignment. How can we write an assignment? You need to really plan it in such a way that within a given time frame you are able to finish something. So this is an exercise that we do in terms of an academic program that we have. Writing and as part of that academic program, if we are engaged in writing a dissertation and things like that, we need to really plan everything in advance and write several drafts and so on. That I think can be done in a workshop mode, where we really sit together and read the stuff which students write and suggest improvements and so on. But only we can broadly suggest, we can give broad suggestions regarding how this could be done. So this is one difficulty of that, because it should span over at least a few days, and then we read each other's writing and suggest improvements. But the other thing is that we really have to have a theme that will be broken into sub-themes and planned in such a way that something like an 8,000 word article can be thought about. Usually for publishers, they demand they just say that you can have 7,000 to 8,000 word article. So we plan it in such a way that we have a main theme that we work with, and if your data comes from ethnographic kind of research, you have to arrange everything in such a way that you really connect with the already existing knowledge, and then you have to review that and then see where your intervention actually fits in, and then you segregate that into different segments and have this whole thing. Like the easy way to, perhaps it's easier said than done, because even when I start doing something, I find a lot of difficulties in doing these things within a given period of time. Even as we divide our task evenly across the time that we have set apart for finishing a task, then devote our time for each of the points that we want it to be part of this, want them to be part of the essay, then plan it accordingly. So these are the kind of things. These are easier said than done. That's what I am saying. But we should have a real blueprint of action as far as writing something is concerned. And it should really proceed by at least 6 months of intense reading of an area. Like if you want to write about your street vendors, I'm sure that you really need to do that much reading, and also see how over a period of time how street vending becomes a real problem. And it also depends on a certain kind of consumption that has evolved, right? So the street vending is not a very innocuous thing. It's not a very simple thing, but it is connected with a certain kind of political economy of commodities, consumption, and many other things related to the ways in which we understand a commodity or commodities, and what are the the kind of histories of those commodities. A lot of things actually come in there. You see, if you go to the store of I don't know what word you can use. If you go to a street vendor vending, many of these everyday items, you will soon realize that they are selling things for a lower end customer, the lower end things for a poor certain segment of the consumers who are not very rich. You have similar commodities of high end variety in another place, in a fancy place, like in Lulu Mall, for instance, in Trivandrum, you have another variety of that. So there is a political economy that connects the life of these people with these commodities, right? So, which means that the moment you start writing this particular piece, then one aspect of it is political economy. Then the other one is really cultural, like what are the ways in which you understand a commodity? This is the whole thing. How do you understand a commodity? So, like, I draw your attention to the thesis of Arjun Appadure, for instance, the social life of things, where he talks about these kinds of things. And you have a variety of things being talked about this. The commodities and how the commodities become part of our own lives. And all these are truly there. Not just for the person who sells it, but for those who come to purchase this. Now, what are the ways in which you are an ethnographer? So, another person who is a historian, when he comes over there, what do these commodities mean to him? These commodities are significant for historians because each commodity has its own history. And if you want to look at, now you go to a store, a street vendor who sells all these utensils, daily wear. And utensils have a different kind of history depending on the social class of the people who are buying, the nature of their consumption, etc. Then can you really look at what point of time earthenware was supplemented by what you call this Chinaware kind of thing, that sort of thing. So from pottery to that of fancy wares that you have. So in between, probably you may not find many goods, but porcelain is much more sought after, or high quality porcelain could be a much sought after thing. But in the streets, you also have another in between commodities. Between earthenware and high-end porcelain, you have a medium-sized thing, but they are not very cheap either. So each of those commodities tell you different life history of those commodities and the question of consumption itself. And then when you want to write this, you bring in all these issues and then show how best an ethnography can emerge out of this. So this is how probably you can really, take your call as far as this particular thing is concerned. Now, okay, so in the remaining 10 minutes perhaps, I move on to the problem that Joby and Rajesh wanted me to talk about. It's all about writing subaltern lives. So I have a few examples with me. One of them is, the example of, I haven't brought it here, but I just reproduced that. Some materials published in sometime towards the end of 19th century, end of 19th century, but it brought together information of an earlier period. So I read this in India Office collection of the British Library. It talks about the experiences of some enslaved people in Cochin, in the Cochin state, where these people were forced to plow the field along with animals. So there is a report of one of this administrators based in Kochi. He wrote this, and this is part of a file of primary materials on slavery, abolition and all that. The narrative relates to how a Kottayam man was, or several men were forced to plow the field. Then I read about some of the materials of the early 20th century. This comes out of the missionary archives of narratives of people who were asked to speak about their experiences of living under slavery in Travancore. So this was, I think, a few sentences which I wrote. if I can locate that file. Take some water. Okay. So I'm just, this is part of an article which I wrote, but an unpublished one. So I just quote from this. On December 13, 1904, when the CMS Jubilee was celebrated at the Chelakamp village, little away from Kottayam, towards the east, it turned out to be an occasion for retrieving the memory of the ancestors who had suffered untold miseries under caste slavery. Now you can check the ways in which I wrote this and offer a critique of that, because there are several value-loaded terms used in it, one of which is ancestor. Okay, because that conference was talking more about the experiences of the ancestors, right? Who had suffered untold miseries under caste slavery. In other words, it was a wake-up call for the ancestors. That was the title of the conference. The meeting began with reciting Psalm 44, I quote, "With our own ears we have heard it, O God. O God, our ancestors have told us about it, about the great things you did in their time, in the days of long ago," unquote. This was followed by the solemn address of the missionary J.J.B. Palmer. He subsequently became the Bishop of Kottayam, Anglican Bishop of Travancore, Cochin. He addressed the meeting of the slave caste Christians, I quote, "on the delivery of Israel from the Egyptian bondage and their trial in the wilderness for 40 years before they attained full liberty," unquote. This was followed by the speeches of 4 people who had recalled their extreme experiences of slavery. The oldest man from the Mitatmav congregation. Mitatmav is a small village. It is towards, what's that, Kargachal area, I guess. Yeah, Malapalli, that area. Who first referring to the severity of oppression, I quote, "He had to work from very early in the morning till very late in the evening. He had seen men yoked with a bullock or buffalo, forced to draw the plow, and afterward chained so that he might not escape." In his testimony, the second individual referred to how they were not even allowed to bury their dead without a day's work being completed. According to him, they were sold, the father to one man, the mother to another, and the children to several separate persons, and would not be allowed to see one another afterwards under such cruel treatment. Some have entered the forest preferring to be eaten up by wild beasts than to lead such miserable conditions. So this narrative goes like that. So this is early 20th century. The first one I said is late 19th century, but actually the events could be much earlier, but recalled by an official in the late 90s, around I think 1870s that time. Then I look at some fieldwork material that we have collected in 2019 from a village in Kannur district. We listened to the narrative of a man whose paternal grandmother's uncle was forced to plow the field along with a buffalo. This is early 20th century in Kottayam district. This event happened, but the person recalls this as they live in Kannur district now. Okay. Paternal grandmother's uncle was forced to plow the land along with a buffalo, as he was instrumental in missing a draught animal, as he took these animals the previous day for grazing. Exposed to severe sun, hunger and bodily fatigue, the man fell into the muddy waters of the field, as he could not keep pace with the animal to pull the plow. The angry landlord dragged him out of the muddy field, tied his hands and feet together, and put him on a block of log. The landlord's henchman, beheaded him with an axe, and afterwards thrust a pole into the open mouth of this severed head, and the frightened relatives of the victim buried his corpse. The narrator's father, the person who narrated this story, the narrator's father, an young adult at that point of time, also participated in the burial when the reported event took place. This event must have happened around 1917, and the place of occurrence was a village north to Kottayam town of Kerala. So you see, look at this. So I'm giving you this sort of fragments from around middle of the 19th century, the first one, which I reproduced from my memory, and the rest of it, narratives of around the fag end of the 19th century and early 20th century, and this one is 1917. Now, obviously, when there are several points of entry as far as these narratives are concerned. Now, if students of history in this hall can recollect, perhaps the article by Ranajit Guha in Subaltern Studies, Volume 5, Chandra's Death. Chandra's death is the story of a young woman, young adult, who was impregnated by one of her relatives and then forced to undergo this termination of pregnancy, and eventually she dies. So, the researcher comes across this particular narrative in an archival collection. Guha writes about that. So that one is often talked about as a good example of this ethnographic kind of history. Although the author doesn't talk about it, you find this ethnography coming in a very big way in that article. But the mode is that of a historical narrative, and you in fact find the blending of both, the blending of this ethnographic stuff as well as historical stuff. So if you take these kinds of things, as we mentioned earlier, you don't get an entire life being narrated here. So we have collected a number of fragmentary, episodic kind of lives of this kind, where this kinds of visitation of the past takes place in a very, very mysterious manner. When people talk about events where this kinds of gruesome killing takes place, and it becomes sedimented in their minds as part of their social memory, and they are not always available for recall. This is also important. They are not always available for recall. Now, this is the point. This I am just saying as a flash point of entry. But you have many other things. It is not that all the time you talk about this kinds of extreme cruelties, killing, bloodshed, and things like that. It's not always like that. You also have moments of joy. You have moments of life being celebrated. You have moments of love. You have moments of sex. You have moments of childbirth, children being looked after, children being made to grow, and at some point children being sold. So Esther had asked me this question. I don't know if she's still there in this group. She had asked this question about using the Dutch archives to write about the histories of enslavement. So there are many ways of doing this. This is what I'm saying. In most cases, we get these kinds of fragmentary things. And now, how are we going to write? So what was it like? Scripting subaltern lives, something like that. Scripting lives. So, sorry. Yeah. I think you have to go back to these files. Yeah. Okay. John, can you help me? Yeah. Let's go to that. Sorry, that announcement. Yes. Look at this. This is crafting subaltern life. So you have a variety of things being talked about. Maybe we leave it for another time. But I just read this to show that there are many ways in which you can do this. Because you don't have a full exposure to the lives of the people. But sometimes you get that. Sometimes you get, if you are very lucky, you get. But often enough, I think historians who have worked on these kinds of materials, they also have only received, the fragmentary things. Because that's where the question comes: who wrote this, for whom, what purpose, etc. It was not for giving an entire narrative of a person's life. They wrote this. It was just to highlight the flash moments in the lives of these people that they wrote. So therefore, as researchers, when we look at this archive or this social memory, what constrains us is that we don't have a full narrative of this. And that full narrative, probably one can recreate in a very imaginary way. And the seminar for which I wrote this, so this was interestingly titled as Wake Up Call for Our Ancestors. The artist who coordinated this academic event, his name is Sajan Mani. He's quite well known public artist. So he actually wanted to talk about the images of the past. This is the kind of way he talked about it. And then even as we look at the images of the past, we are not getting a full narrative of that. But we may draw this West African example, for instance, of Kinda Kunde, for instance, which is known to people. Alex Haley's book, The Roots, where you have a full-scale narrative because of the archival traces which were really united, brought together to write a full-scale exposition of the biography, which spans across time. That kind of things are also possible. But given the kind of, the problem with the archives here, I don't think that we get full-length, it is possible to get a full-length narrative. But we also have come across individuals whose history can be reconstructed fully. It is possible. We have come across such cases in Kottayam itself, where you have a variety of representation of individuals' life, and then the families of those individuals can still be traced to. I mean, their descendants are still alive, and they all really keep up these memories in various ways. So if you go to those archival traces or those social memories, it is also possible that some of the lives of the 19th century, late 19th century, etc., the people who died sometime in the 1880s or late 1880s, etc., we can actually recreate their lives. So that possibility is also there. So I'm not going into the already existing narratives which are printed in books and available for us to read. Now here what I am suggesting is that there are similar lives that are there in the archival traces, and it is for historians to really look at this and see how you can talk about this. Now, so it is really a big challenge. I'm not saying that I'm trying to craft subaltern lives or anything like that, because this is a very highly loaded kind of representation as you have it there. But this is worth pursuing. This is what I'm saying. This is worth pursuing. But if you want to write about other well-known figures, people who were part of the labor movement or a movement of agricultural laborers, etc., of the 20th century, who were also subalterns, then you get a lot of information about their lives. But I was interested in these archival traces and then see how we can write about it. That's not really possible. So I am not going into texts like Chandra's Death and others, because these are already there being discussed a great deal about that. I request you to read them. But here I thought I will bring in some stuff which is not really known to people. That's why I just read this. Now I think I took an extra 2 minutes and I stop here. And so that we have some more time, if you are patient, we can have some discussion. So that is up to you to decide. So the rest of the problems, I think, Joby, we need to take it on a longish manner now. We set apart a few days where we can have a kind of workshop where people write and we read and things like that. In a limited span of time. Yeah, so, yeah. Thank you.